The printer whirs to life at 8:54 a.m. In Dhaka. It shouldn't. Inside Bangladesh Bank's headquarters. The air is thick with dust and heat. Ceiling fans chopping the silence into uneven pieces. Clerks move through their routines half awake, unaware that on the other side of the world, inside a sterile server room in New York, messages are already flying across the SWIFT network, stamped with Bangladesh Bank's authority. 35 transfer requests, nearly $1 billion, sent to accounts in the Philippines and Sri Lanka. Inside the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, alarms don't blare. No red lights flash. The transactions look legitimate. They carry the correct codes, the right formatting, the digital fingerprints of a trusted central bank. Money begins to move. Then something breaks the spell. Printer error. Typo. One word that doesn't belong. Foundation instead of fund. It's small. Almost nothing. But it's enough to make a Fed employee pause. Just long enough to ask a question that shouldn't exist in a system built on blind trust. By the time phones start ringing in Dhaka, $81 million is already gone. Not stolen by a lone hacker in a basement. Not by cybercriminals chasing fast cash. This was something else. A precision operation. A state-level cyber heist. A silent financial missile launched without a single shot fired. As investigators scramble across time zones, a terrifying realization begins to set in. This wasn't just a robbery. It was a rehearsal, a proof of concept, a message to the world's financial system. If money is trust and trust is digital, then everything is vulnerable. And the people behind it, they were just getting started. To understand how nearly $1 billion could vanish through legitimate banking channels without breaking a single vault or pointing a single gun, you have to go back years earlier, long before the transfers, before the malware, before anyone outside intelligence circles had heard the name Lazarus Group. Because this story doesn't begin in a bank. It begins inside one of the most isolated nations on Earth. North Korea does not have Silicon Valley. It does not have venture capital, open internet access, or startup culture. What it does have is scarcity, and a regime that learned early that keyboards could be more powerful than bombs. By the early 2000s, while the world focused on missiles and nuclear tests, North Korea quietly invested in something far cheaper and far harder to trace. Cyber warfare. Talented students were identified young, pulled from regular life, and placed into elite technical programs. Mathematics, computer science, reverse engineering, obedience. These were not freelancers. They were assets. By the time sanctions tightened in the 2010s, choking off trade, oil, and foreign currency, the mission evolved. Cyber units were no longer just tools of espionage or sabotage. They became something new. Revenue generators. Somewhere within this ecosystem, a group Western intelligence agencies would later label Lazarus Group began operating with chilling efficiency. Their early attacks were loud Sony pictures in 2014, destructive malware, leaked emails. But those operations taught them a lesson. Noise brings consequences. Money moved quietly does not. Between 2013 and 2016, Lazarus shifted tactics. Instead of attacking companies, they went after infrastructure, the invisible plumbing that moves trillions of dollars every day. And at the center of it all was SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. A system so trusted, so deeply embedded, that questioning it felt almost absurd. Until Bangladesh Bank. Until the money started moving. Until the world realized that the greatest bank robbery in history didn't require masks, guns, or getaway cars. Just patience, access, and a deep understanding of how trust actually works. SWIFT was never meant to be hacked. Not because it was invincible, but because it wasn't supposed to be questioned. More than 11,000 banks, central institutions, and financial organizations across over 200 countries relied on it every single day. SWIFT didn't move money itself. It moved instructions. And those instructions were treated as gospel. If a message came through SWIFT, you trusted it. Lazarus understood that better than anyone. Investigators would later piece together the first quiet steps of the operation. Phishing emails crafted with surgical precision, sent to employees inside Bangladesh Bank. Not mass spam, not sloppy bait. These messages looked internal, routine, forgettable, the most dangerous kind. Somewhere, someone clicked. That was all it took. The malware that followed was custom-built. Not off-the-shelf crimeware, but something designed specifically to live inside bank systems without being noticed. It watched, learned routines, studied transaction timings, authentication procedures, daily rhythms. For months, possibly longer, it waited. This wasn't a smash and grab. It was a stakeout. Bangladesh bank systems were old, underfunded, poorly segmented. Printers were connected directly to core banking machines. Firewalls were weak. Logs were incomplete. To Lazarus, it wasn't a fortress, it was an unlocked side door. By early 2016, the attackers knew exactly how SWIFT messages were created, approved, printed, and archived inside the bank. They knew which hours were quiet, which employees took breaks, which alerts could be suppressed. So when the night came, February 4th, rolling into February 5th, they moved. 35 fraudulent SWIFT messages were sent to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, requesting transfers totaling $951 million. Each message followed the correct format. Each carried legitimate credentials. Each looked identical to thousands of real transactions that happened every day. Inside Bangladesh Bank, the malware did something even more insidious. It sabotaged the printers. Normally, every SWIFT transaction generated a paper record, a physical confirmation that something had moved. But that night, the printers stayed silent. No alerts, no paper trail, no chance for a human to notice what the system didn't flag. By the time employees returned after the weekend, nearly $1 billion had already tried to leave the country. Only chance intervened. One transfer to Sri Lanka was blocked because of that typo, foundation instead of fund. Another set of transactions raised suspicion due to routing irregularities. But 5 transfers totaling $81 million slipped through. They landed in accounts in the Philippines. And that's where the money began to evaporate. Casino junket operators moved fast. Funds were converted, laundered, shuffled through gambling chips, shell accounts, and cash withdrawals. By the time authorities realized the scale of what had happened, the trail was already cold. But the real shock wasn't the money lost. It was what the attack revealed. This wasn't a vulnerability in Bangladesh Bank alone. It was a flaw in global trust. If one compromised endpoint could authorize transfers from the Federal Reserve itself, then no institution, no matter how powerful, was truly safe. As cybersecurity firms and intelligence agencies dug deeper, familiar fingerprints began to emerge. Code similarities, infrastructure overlaps, tactics previously seen in attacks attributed to North Korea. The Lazarus group wasn't just stealing anymore. They were testing the limits of the financial world. And Bangladesh was only the beginning. The money didn't disappear. It dissolved. Once the $81 million landed in the Philippines, it entered a world where financial oversight blurred into suggestion and enforcement moved at the speed of paper. The accounts were held at RCBC, Resol Commercial Banking Corporation, opened under false names, activated just long enough to receive the transfers. From there, the laundering began immediately. Funds were split, redirected, converted into casino chips at Manila gambling halls, then cashed out again. Casinos, at the time, were exempt from many anti-money laundering regulations. They were perfect black holes. Money could go in clean and come out unrecognizable. By the time alarms were raised internationally, most of the cash was already gone. Hearings followed. Congressional investigations. Public outrage in Bangladesh, where the theft represented a staggering blow to a developing nation's reserves. Careers ended. Governors resigned. Bank officials were fired. Lawsuits were filed across borders. But the most unsettling realization came from Western intelligence agencies. This wasn't an isolated crime. As analysts reviewed the malware used in Bangladesh, patterns emerged, code similarities with previous Lazarus operations. Command and control servers overlapped with infrastructure tied to North Korean cyber units. The same disciplined patience. The same silence. Then came the wider picture. In Vietnam, Ecuador, Taiwan, and Poland, banks reported similar attempted SWIFT frauds. Some were stopped. Some weren't. In total, Lazarus-linked operations targeted hundreds of millions more, probing defenses, adjusting techniques, refining the playbook. This was iteration, learning, weaponization. For North Korea, cyber theft wasn't just profitable, it was strategic. Sanctions limited oil, trade, and foreign currency. Cyber operations bypassed all of it. No ships, no smugglers, no borders, just packets of data and compromised trust. Governments began to panic quietly. If a sanctioned state could finance itself through cybercrime, what did deterrence even mean? Missiles could be tracked. Nuclear facilities could be monitored. But malware didn't need launch pads. It needed access. SWIFT rushed out security advisories. Banks were told to segment networks, harden endpoints, monitor logs. The illusion of implicit trust was replaced with something colder. Verification. But trust, once broken, never fully heals. Behind closed doors, intelligence agencies made a darker assessment. The Bangladesh heist wasn't the peak of Lazarus' ambition. It was proof that financial systems could be bent without being broken. And if money could be stolen at this scale, what else could be taken? As the world focused on patching banks, Lazarus was already moving on. Toward something even faster, even less regulated, and even more global. Cryptocurrency. Banks learned. Slowly. Reluctantly. But they learned. After Bangladesh, the doors began to close. Firewalls hardened. SWIFT access tightened. Audits became routine. The old assumptions, this message must be real because it looks real, were no longer enough. For Lazarus, that meant adaptation. They didn't retreat. They pivoted. Because while banks were fortifying marble halls and legacy systems, an entirely new financial universe was exploding into existence. One built on speed, anonymity, and code written faster than it could be secured. Cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ethereum, exchanges popping up overnight. Billions flowing through platforms run by small teams, thin security, and almost no regulation. No central authority. No universal rules. No single phone number to call when everything went wrong. To Lazarus, it was paradise. By 2017, Lazarus-linked operations began targeting crypto exchanges across Asia and beyond. South Korea was hit hardest. Its booming crypto market made it a prime target. Employees received phishing emails disguised as job offers, trading reports, internal updates. Once again, someone clicked. Malware followed. Private keys were stolen. Hot wallets drained. Cold storage breached through compromised admin machines. Unlike banks, crypto transactions were final. No recalls. No freezes. Once funds moved, they were gone. Hundreds of millions disappeared. Then came 2022. The Ronin bridge hack used by the popular game Axie Infinity. Lazarus exploited Valedictorian's validator system, gaining control over enough nodes to authorize withdrawals. In a single operation, they stole over $600 million in cryptocurrency. It was one of the largest crypto heists in history, and it wasn't subtle. Blockchain analysts traced the wallets almost immediately. The fingerprints were unmistakable. Western governments publicly attributed the attack to North Korea. Sanctions followed. Wallets were blacklisted. It didn't matter. Crypto moved faster than diplomacy. Funds were split, mixed, laundered through decentralized services, swapped across chains, obscured layer by layer. Lazarus didn't need to hide forever, just long enough. By conservative estimates, North Korean cyber operations have generated billions of dollars over the past decade. Money that intelligence agencies believe directly supports weapons programs, missile tests, and regime survival. This wasn't cybercrime anymore. It was national strategy. And it forced an uncomfortable question onto the world stage. What happens when a state can rob the global financial system faster than the system can respond? Unlike traditional criminals, Lazarus didn't fear arrest. Its operators weren't hiding in foreign countries. They were protected by borders that would never extradite them, working inside facilities designed to keep them invisible. They had no faces, no names, only output. Meanwhile, the human cost rippled outward. Bank employees who trusted their systems, countries whose reserves were drained, crypto investors who watched life savings vanish into hexadecimal strings. The world had built a financial system on trust, then digitized it, then globalized it without fully accepting what that meant. That trust could be stolen, and Lazarus had proven it. But every operation leaves traces, patterns, weaknesses, and somewhere inside intelligence agencies, cybersecurity firms, and financial institutions, a new question began to take shape. If Lazarus could do this, there was no victory parade, no dramatic arrest, no handcuffs clicked shut at dawn. The people behind the greatest digital bank robbery in history simply faded back into the system that had created them. Anonymous operators behind terminals, protected by a state that denied everything and admitted nothing. But the damage was already done. After Bangladesh, the financial world changed in ways most people never noticed. Banks began treating their own networks like hostile territory. Zero-trust architectures replaced blind faith. Printers, once ignored, became security risks. Audit logs, segmentation, multi-factor approvals, real-time monitoring. All reactions to a single realization. The system had been too polite, too trusting, and politeness had almost cost a country $1 billion. For Bangladesh, the consequences were deeply personal. Public trust in national institutions cracked. Officials were fired or forced to resign. Years of development planning were set back. The money was never fully recovered. For the global financial system, the lesson was darker. If money could be weaponized digitally, then sanctions, borders, and even warfare itself had changed. A nation under siege could now fund itself invisibly. A keyboard could bypass navies, embargoes, and airspace. Cyber power had joined nuclear power, not as a replacement, but as a quieter companion. And yet, the most unsettling truth was this. Nothing about the Bangladesh heist required futuristic technology. No zero-day exploits from science fiction. No artificial intelligence gone rogue. Just access, patience, and trust abused at scale. Today, trillions of dollars still move across the same networks, every single day. The system is more secure now, but it is also more aware. Because once you've seen the ghost in the machine, you never stop looking for it again. Somewhere, right now, another operator is studying logs, watching routines, waiting, not to break the system.